Virtual is here to stay. Why not get good at it? Mike Carr.
Hello, all. How is it all going? I hope you can see me because I cannot see myself. I am going to come over and highlight and talk about a few things while I look very quickly to highlight the speaker. David, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Well, we can hear you, yes.
Okay. Okay. So it's not highlighting the speaker. I will need to take a minute to see myself. Talk amongst yourselves very briefly. Hello, all. And thank you for joining me here in my library. It is so great to be with you. I've really enjoyed talking with David. And of course, I love this whole idea about virtual presentations. We're able to get with all of you wonderful people right here across the top. But let me ask you a question. What is it that we are really trying to do in virtual presentations? Well, I think that we are probably wanting to say something in an entertaining way while building rapport and a connection with our audience, aren't we? So that our audience remembers what we say, but also they stay engaged. And in that way, virtual is no different than anything else. And that's why I'd like to talk to you about this cowboy hat right here. This cowboy hat is my granddad's. He wore it from my earliest memory of him. He was in construction. He grew up in Haskell, Oklahoma, and walked through this world laughing all the time, doing really interesting things. And there was a time whenever one of my earliest memories of my granddad, he told me that he had taken us out to this teeter-totter. Now, if any of you have been on a teeter-totter recently, it's a bar across that two different kids sit on, and we would start teeter-tottering up and down, back and forth. And he told me that it was so funny to him that as I was riding up and down with my sister, I started crawling into the middle of the teeter-totter and got my friend Chris Krug to come over and sit on the other side. So as they teeter-tottered, I just sat in the middle, and he said, "Michael, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, this seems like the very most stable spot to be in." And so I sat there for a little while, and then he said I got up and I stood up in the middle so that I was riding both sides of the teeter-totter as it went up and down, and I turned to him and I said, "And it's also the most fun." I was standing right in the balance. And that's what my granddad and I would say to you is one of the keys to virtual is finding the balance in a number of things. I'm going to talk about several S's, tell a few stories, but talk about the way we connect virtually and how that even transitions into in-person as we're speaking professionally, as we're speaking for our communities, and as we're speaking with our families around online. So the great thing about virtual is it allows us to do some things that we cannot do in person. And a whole lot of people forget that. Now, it's one thing that Ella, our prior speaker, I noticed did really, really well. Imagine Ella giving that presentation on a stage in front of 3,000 people in a ballroom. Maybe we would see some of her actions, but we really wouldn't be able to see so much of the expression that she came out in her face unless she had a camera on her. And then we would be watching the camera or the Videotron in the ballroom instead of watching her on stage. So we've been doing virtual for a long time, even when we were doing in-person events, we've recognized that there are benefits to this medium that do not exist with someone standing in a ballroom way far away. And part of the problem that we have when we close our minds, we bracket our minds in on virtual, is that we're too often saying, how do I translate my message in a virtual medium? We're thinking about the medium rather than what are the strengths here? What are things that I can do here that I cannot do in person? I cannot do anywhere else. Now, our brains are great puzzle connectors. So even if we just start asking ourselves that as virtual presenters, what can I do in this format, in this medium, that I cannot do anywhere else? That's where you wake up at 2 a.m., you're getting a drink of water and you say, oh yeah. Well, what I could do is I could start a speech right here with only this visual and then point out something on the wall. And when most of our human faculties, our brains are attracted to eyes, because that's the way we either were created or evolved. We find the eyes in the frame. When there are no eyes in the frame, then our eyes immediately go to where our fingers go or something else we want to show. And so we begin to think about what are the strengths of virtual, and that can spawn creativity. Also, virtual has the ability to migrate like you cannot do on stage. Let's say you are in a spot and lights go out. You can move, we can move, and use that creativity to create movement in our background that is not possible while we're still remaining intimate. So the first S that I would suggest that we think about is the balance of the similar with the novelty. We as humans, we crave both novelty and similarity. And a lot of times, especially in Toastmasters clubs and when we're in the contest, we're thinking about how can we be very similar. I went back whenever I was looking at various different speeches. I went back, like I'm sure all of us have done, and looked at the speeches of the world champions, because they're good speeches, except for the one that won in 2020. But all the rest, they're really good speeches. And there are things in there that we can begin to take and use. But let me present something to you and see if you've ever seen this, where someone is in a speech in a Toastmaster contest, and they're talking about their story, and this was the story of my life, and they're very impassioned, and then they pause and they reach out and they say, have you ever felt rejected in a room full of people? That was great the first time we saw it. But now we've seen that same piece of similarity so many times that it feels tired to judges and it feels tired to us as an audience. So the similarity that we can grab hold of is reaching out to our audience and asking them and asking the audience about themselves. But it has to be balanced, like the teeter-totter, with something that is novel, something that might rather say, my version of this in The Librarian, Mrs. Montgomery, and that's not the perfect way to do it, but it's just to give you an example of one example how I tried to do that is, instead of turning to the audience and say, have you ever tried something and it failed? Instead, talked about failing with putting that machine back together, and Mrs. Montgomery puts her arm around me and says, it's okay that you tried and failed. And then later called back to it to say, what is it that Mrs. Montgomery said? The effort is not in the results, the effort is in the try. So a similarity of reaching out to the audience, balanced by the novelty of doing it in a different way, helps us in the contest, but even more important in life, it helps keep our audiences engaged. One of the things, though, we can do in virtual is we can even begin to think about the novel things that we can add into our presentations. We've talked about you can come up into the corner, or like I saw someone do, act like a big sliding door is coming, could fall down into a hole, or have two other people speak to one another, or hang from the ceiling, or, as David asked me not to encourage you to do, make the screen bleed. That may be too far. And that's one of the things about the balance of similarity and novelty, is that David brought up this, we were having this conversation, and I said, I'm going to encourage everybody really to push the envelope and get out there. And he said, well, with, let me see if I can do my best David Carr impression of my long lost cousin. He said, well, I'm not sure I can even do it. He said, well, we don't want to make the screen bleed. And it's a really profound statement if we think about what's underneath that. That's a little too far outside the envelope. So novelty, we can be so new and show our audience things that they've never seen before, but they may not be ready for. So that it's in that balance that our very best presentations come. That balance also is not static. It definitely is dynamic, because people have been trying new things virtually. Then that balance has shifted a little further out on the innovation scale. But we always need to be watching, listening, watching what is working, because the balance is in the novelty and the similarity. So let's start, if you start brainstorming things, if you start stoking your creativity, and you think, what could I do with this medium that I could not do in person? I could hang from the ceiling. I could come in from the side. One of the Toastmaster contestants that I coached was getting stair steps so that she walked down levels of stairs while she is speaking. That visual could happen only in virtual. Another was, I recommended, because she was starting as her aunt, that she start the speech like this, like the audience is a little child, and she leans down, and the camera comes up, and the first thing she does is leans down and says, what did you do? That kind of a visual we cannot create in person. It is a benefit of this medium. I was telling David that I was recently doing a sales kickoff for a tech company, and I was doing an executive retreat in Colorado. I was kind of overbooked, those overlaps. So I was in a hotel room in Colorado. We had it all set up, but I noticed that in the bathroom of this hotel, the shower was complete glass, all glass. And just thought, okay, what is the advantage of this hotel room being here in Denver? Is it the view out the window? Is it anything else in the hotel room? And I looked at that all glass shower, and I thought, is there something we could do with that? Well, in the sales presentation, what happened, we were talking about grit. We were talking about determination. We were talking about that taking risks does not kill you. And as I talked, I gave the same example I just gave to you a minute ago, that sometimes grit means you have to migrate, that lights go out and you have to migrate to a place where there's better light. And I walked this computer into the bathroom and I set it on the vanity. And I talked a little bit more to the camera. And then I talked even more about risks. And I said, sometimes, your wonderful sunny days become cloudy. And then sometimes it even starts pouring rain on you. And I reached in and I turned on the shower, and fully clothed, pulling my microphone out here, I stepped underneath the shower, fully clothed. Well, I can tell you, as I walked into the bathroom and I saw the gallery view, there were some people who were looking down. There were some people I could tell they were working on their computer. When I got underneath that shower, fully clothed, all eyes were on me. I had everyone's attention. And I walked out of the shower and I kind of sat down. And I said, now, why on earth did I get in that shower? It's because the next time you're in a sales engagement and you're trying to hold tight on price, or you're trying to ask for a larger order than you've ever asked for before, it's going to feel scary. But if you just remember that there was that idiot who on a global sales call got in the shower fully clothed, and it did not kill him, it did not kill me. Just remember, you take a risk, even if it fails and you look like an idiot, it doesn't kill you. So go ahead and take the risk anyway. I immediately started getting calls from the person who hired me, the sales manager. I got texts from the CEO saying, that was awesome. It was goofy, but it completely made the point that we wanted to make to our sales professionals. And they gave my name out and booked me again for the next year. I could not have done that in person. And I couldn't have done it if we weren't constantly saying, what's that balance between the novelty, and the similarity? So let's think about it today. What could we do here? What if I can't hang from the ceiling? I can't do it, but you can have this effect back and forth. And we've all done that, right? But what if we could blow this wall out? What if we could just blow that back and have that not there? We can't do that, can we? Or can we? Can we do some things that just get rid of that wall? And that brings me to the kind of second point that I'll talk about, is the second piece of balance is the balancing the art and the science of speaking. That if I'm going to blow the wall out, you can't really move from an indoor venue to an outdoor venue in person, can you? But in virtual, it's very easy to do. There is a squirrel that lives right up here that I have noticed recently. If I turn my camera this way, you're able to see, maybe on that window right over there, there is something that we have put up on the window that we put birdseed in just to watch the birds come walking in. And for now 2 or 3 years, there's a squirrel that lives right up here who's climbed up these posts, climbed up every way he can figure to try to get that birdseed on the window. But he's not been able to get there. And I'll show you why. Here's where the birdseed is. And the squirrel can crawl up the screen. The squirrel can crawl up the side here of this wood, but he starts to try to scamper up that glass and he falls every time. And I have to say, I wish that we didn't laugh, but we do laugh. We've laughed at the squirrel. I've laughed at the squirrel all the time. It's like, ha ha, I've beaten you. You can't get to the birdseed that's meant for the birds. And then the Cardinals and the Blue Jays come in and it's just beautiful. So my desk is right inside that window. I was sitting there the other day and I noticed the squirrel crawl up this side on that wood, pause for a minute and jump over onto the birdseed hanger, slip around and fall off. And I laughed. I was on a call. We have an investment company and I was on a call with some investors and I laughed. Then he crawled up this side and he crawled up that side. That squirrel finally jumped and landed on that bird feeder. And now he has figured out how to do it consistently. He eats us out of house and home on birdseed. And he has become my superhero, my mentor on being persistent. That's what I would ask you to do, my friend, because that really is the secret to great and growing and effective virtual presentations. It is trying things, continuing to try things, be the squirrel that just does not give up. And we talk about persistence, but this squirrel has tried to get to that bird feeder for years. For years, we've had it up there and watched all through COVID and has consistently failed. But there's something in that squirrel's little brain that will not let it stop. And if you and I have that kind of passion about the message, then we find another balance between stories and systems. I thought Ella did it so well, the way that she was so expressive to the camera and the way that she talked about the hashtag, and she did several things that if you're still on, Ella, that I'm going to just steal those. I'm just telling you. I think that's great. But then she also had visuals that were not distracting. And I would say that, you know, David's admonition of me earlier, let's please not have the screen bleed. It was really good because that could have been distracting. It may have been using a system just for the purpose of using some kind of cool system. I was talking with 2 other world champions of public speaking just this last week. Ryan Avery, got a chance to catch up with him, and David Henderson. And both of those guys have made points about props and costumes that are really, really good. They essentially both say the same thing about costumes and props. They say only use those things if it means that it takes words out of what you have to say later. If you can tell the story better with a prop or with a costume, then use it. But if it diminishes the story or it's distracting, we never want to use it. And so for good or ill, that's why I'm not using slides in this, is because I want you to have the opportunity to be able to weigh the presentation that you see today from me versus the other things you see today, to be able to make your own informed decision. Okay, do I want to use more heavy tech, or do I want to use less, none at all, or do I want to use a lot? And quite honestly, my friend, I don't care if my speech today is the worst one that you've heard or will hear, if it helps you make an informed decision about the way you want to improve your speech. Because I'm a heavy storyteller, I try to be funny, and I try to say important things. And I fail a lot. But you remember, the victory is not in the result. The victory is in the try. I really do believe it. So I would suggest that you weigh that balance, systems versus stories, and it's probably a balance of both. I saw Ella do it really well in that balance. And if you want to think about somebody who's done that well, she's a real good near recent example. The final balance I think that I want to talk about is then the balance of the science versus the art. I'm always going to encourage you to try things, to shoot for new things, and really just push the edge of what we do in this box. And if your goal is to win a Toastmasters contest or to get hired again by the company that you're right now speaking to, then it becomes very important for you to balance the art of trying new things with the science of knowing your audience. I just saw a Facebook post by a real good friend of mine, Tina D'Souza, here in District 55. She said that she had competed in the humorous speech contest and she came in third. Her speech title was My Torrid Affair. And she said, hey, if you want to see it, here's the link. Here's the warning. Some people have said that this speech may have been a little bit too risque for a Toastmaster audience. And I watched the speech and it was really funny. And she did a fantastic job. and she didn't win. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say to you, that's where we balance the art and the science. I hope we continue to push that edge of the envelope further out, that frontier, that creative frontier further out, not only here in virtual, but also in our in-person presentations, for the purpose of being entertaining so our audience remembers the key content that we bring out. And we have to remember that we balance that with there are various different cultural and subcultural nuances that if we really want to be effective and not just push the envelope, we need to listen to our audience first. And that starts with a person that is bringing us in. If it's Toastmasters to a group of judges, judges in Austin, Texas judge differently than judges in San Antonio, Texas, and they all judge differently than judges in New York City, and they judge differently than those in Mexico City. All of them judge differently than those in the UAE, in the Middle East, and they all judge differently than those judges that I've met, those wonderful judges that I've met in India and in Sri Lanka, where I'm going to get a chance to be in just another month. If we really care about our audience and helping them improve their lives, that's the science part. It's coming in and asking the questions. And you can do that in a Toastmaster context, or also if you're being brought into industry, that's where we really spend time with the person that's bringing us in, asking questions like, what is the one thing that your CEO or you would like to say to this group that you really can't say? What have you loved the most and hated the most about other speakers that you've brought in? When I was thinking about at that sales conference, getting in the shower, I texted my contact and I said, can we have a quick phone call? And I got on the phone and I said, look, here's a crazy idea. This is its intent. This is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And he said, I'm fine if you give it a shot. If it fails, we never had this conversation. And I said, okay, I'm all right with that. But he said, I think it will work. But we had that conversation. Wasn't for the purpose of covering my tail. It's for the purpose of knowing, is this something that will work with this audience? Does it really communicate the message, or is it distracting? Because remember, what we really want to do in our presentations is we want to say something that really impacts our fellow humans. We want to say it in an entertaining way so that they stay engaged and that they remember. And we want to build rapport and connection, because my friends, this life is too short not to build connection and have active love between fellow humans, whether it's virtually or in person, at every opportunity. And so I would just say two things. One, if you're in the contest this year or a future year, I do take on a few coaching individuals every year. Reach out to me. I'll put my website up there and other contact information. And also, if you're part of a government entity, educational organization, nonprofit, or a company, I do a lot with companies and organizations, and they might benefit in the mindset that we use and the stories we tell ourselves to have better results, then I would just ask that you give them my name and bring us in. If you do that, we'll have a complimentary hour coaching conversation, and I'll do everything I can to make that of value to you. But I want to close with this. I showed you my granddad's hat. Every time I see that, I remember the things he has said to me. It is a visual story, a visual hub that I have. This is my hat. I'm a soccer crazy guy, Austin FC, and I tend to walk around wearing this a lot when I'm not wearing my suit, and my kids see me in this a lot. One of these days, I won't be on this earth, and I hope that one of my kids may have this up somewhere, either way, and that they remember those things that we've talked about. And maybe the next time you see a guy that has a hat on like this, you'll remember that teeter-totter, that life is in that balance. And that tends to be where I find wisdom being. Wisdom like the first, those who want to be first should be last. And those who are last will be first. That if you want to be the most important, be the least of these. The balance between confidence and humility, the balance between heavy writing and spontaneity, and the balance between loving our fellow humans and spending focused time and getting through all of our email. So may you find that balance, my friend. If I can ever help with that, I would love to, if it can work out. I hope that you will end up sharing with me what you've taken from this entire conference and where you will land on tech versus organic. And most of all, please be creative. Please try things in the love of sharing that message that only you can give, because you do have magic stuck in among your ribs. And there are humans on this earth that will only be able to hear that the way you say that. Please go forth and do that. Thank you so much for letting me be a part. Anybody who wants to come in the break room would love to talk more about these things, answer any questions, and go forward from there. David, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Don't they train you in Toastmasters that you're not supposed to thank the host because you're the one that's giving the gift? I've been lectured on that a few times.
No, I just appreciate your letting me come in.